Very happy to welcome everybody to Defend Against Cybercrime with IT Deal Desk. This is hosted by centrexIT and Biocom California. And like I said, we have three fabulous panelists tonight. We have Satish Narayanan, James Morrison, and also Robert Phelps. They're going to entertain you with all sorts of knowledge and stories about cybersecurity. We realize that it can be a very dry topic, but as soon as you hear Robert start talking, you will realize it doesn't have to be dry. So without further ado, and then just a little bit of housekeeping. While we have our panelists speaking, I'll just ask everybody to please keep their videos off so that we have a higher quality level of video for everybody else who's attending. And then also, if you would please like to put any sort of messages into the chat for me, and I'll make sure that we answer them at the Q&A section. We also are going to be sending a $25 Thorn gift card to everybody who attended today. I'm going to post a link to a form you could fill out. Just put in the email address you'd like me to send that gift card to. We'll also do 2 opportunity drawings during the event today for 2 $50 gift cards. And with that, let's start off with a little poll. We are going to be doing a couple polls today. So the first one is, what is the biggest cyber concern you have today? This just helps kind of our panelists target what they're going to say a little bit better so that we make sure that this is the best panel that you can get all the information you need from. All right, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and share these results. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of concerns for all the above, and then with an emphasis on confidentiality of data. Luckily, our panelists have a lot of experience with that. And now I'll pass it over to Grant Page, who's the Director of Client Success at centrexIT.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Appreciate everybody joining today. As we mentioned, we have a great lineup of panelists to talk to us about all the different things that we need to be aware of and raise our level of maturity in cybersecurity, right? At least through conversation. So I wanted to, of course, have the pleasure of introducing our panelists today in the conversation. And first of all, I want to introduce James Morrison. He is the CISO, otherwise known as the Chief Information Security Officer of Ntirety. James joined Ntirety in January of 21 as the CISO after working for 2 years at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, otherwise known as HPE, as a distinguished technologist in cybersecurity. Prior to working at HPE, James spent 22 years with the FBI as a senior computer scientist focused on cybersecurity. He was also an engineer for Lockheed Martin and a system administrator for the U.S. Air Force. James holds professional certifications in CISSP, CEH, GCIH, GCIA, GCFE, A+, Net+, could keep on going. But James, would you like to take a couple of minutes and a short overview to give us what exactly a list of what Ntirety does?
Yeah, and actually, I just started in January of 22. I'm in about the 6-week mark right now, and coming up to speed, with what we do and kind of, how we're focused around security and helping people with managed security products. So my role is to drive what security we want to offer to the customer. So we run a 24/7 SOC here in the United States. We're adding new security products all the time. So we manage firewalls, XDR. We're adding in the management of DLP. And then what's kind of cool also, we live in a world of compliance, and so we offer compliance as a service, which we think is a huge differentiator, because most of the customers are coming to us and saying, I have no idea how to do California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA coming live. or CMMC, which is, the new Defense Department, certifications. And so what we want to do in high trust and HIPAA and all of these different certifications. So we want to make sure that we're able to provide all of those levels of service and help our customers not only succeed at security, but succeed at compliance.
That's great. Thank you so much, James. Appreciate the overview. All right, next up, our next panelist is Robert Phelps. Robert is the CEO of CyberCompass. Background on Mr. Robert, he has over 25 years of experience in technology as a CIO or Chief Information Officer and as a CISO for Fortune 100 companies. He is also a published author, and Robert is passionate about two things: automation and protecting data so businesses survive and thrive, which is why he started CyberCompass. On a personal note, Robert loves Snickers. As he likes to say, it's the original power bar. And he is not a coffee drinker because his team won't let him. You'll soon find out why with his level of energy. So Robert, would you like to give us a short 2-minute overview about what CyberCompass does?
Sure, thank you, Grant. So we're a little different in this game. We are a third-party cyber risk management firm. So we come in and assess companies. That includes various standards for compliance. So it starts out with NIST, CSF, Cybersecurity Framework. But our goal is to try to simplify all of this to take our clients to become cyber resilient. So it's not all about cybersecurity. Everybody, when you say cybersecurity, a lot of people jump into technology. And by the way, James is the guy for those kind of things, right? I mean, we have those guys, the CISP and the technical guys. But we look at this, when you go look at the breakdown of cybersecurity, 67% of your problem are humans. So you have to go across the entire spectrum of the organization. And often people dive into IT, they expect IT to fix everything and just cover all the bases. And that just doesn't work. It's not IT's job to do all that. So we come in, assess across the entire organization, we do technical assessments, and then we actually work with Centrex and other companies, to go and say, hey, these things need to be implemented. You need to improve these areas. So we come in much more of a consulting, assessing, and then consult of what are the solutions you need to put in your organization.
Great, thank you, Robert. Great overview. All right, and last but certainly not least in the lineup of our panelists today is Satish Narayanan. He is the CEO of SecqureOne. Brief overview of Satish. He has over 28 years of experience in information technology, of which more than 15 years has been dedicated in information security and IT compliance. Satish holds professional certifications in CISP, ISO 27001, ISO 22301, ECSA, CEH, CSCS. He has led a team of professionals for HIPAA, PCI DSS, and ISO 27001 implementation in the US, Middle East, and other global markets. Satish is an active speaker on several information security forums and been involved in training C-level executives, managers, information security, and IT professionals globally on varied topics in information security. He's an active member of ISACA and ISSA. Satish holds a bachelor's in engineering specializing in computer science. Satish, would you mind to give us a brief 2-minute overview about what SecqureOne does?
Sure, and thanks for the introduction. SecqureOne is basically an end-to-end cybersecurity and compliance solution provider. We've been in this space for the last 17 years now. Our focus has been in the verticals, which include healthcare, pharma industry, financial services, the retail industry, the manufacturing, and the government sector. We've also developed our own platform, which specifically focuses on the EDR solution. It could also be classified as an MDR and eventually as an XDR as well. So we call this product as SQ1 Shield. So we've been offering this product, along with centrexIT. And this product is a holistic product which covers, it's a unified security and compliance platform. So the main focus, if you look at it from a platform perspective, is kind of covering all the IT assets, be it your cloud assets or, the endpoints or, the work from home environment. So it kind of covers the entire IT landscape. Apart from that, we also offer SOC as a service. We also perform vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, which is more of a consulting kind of an engagement. And apart from that, we also specialize on medical devices assessments, and then API security, web application security testing. And on the compliance side, we also focus compliance as a service, which pretty much covers HIPAA, high trust, the various stages of high trust, PCI, and again, the other compliance standards such as SOC 2, Type 2, ISO 27001, and several other international standards.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Satish, for that great overview. Much appreciated. And before we begin with our panelists today and go into some great questions that we have lined up, I'd like to invite Cheryl Zuckerman from Biocom California to introduce any non-Biocom California members on the call today to the benefits of becoming a member. Then she'll pass it over to Dylan Quiros from centrexIT to give an overview of IT Deal Desk. Cheryl, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Grant. Appreciate it. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Cheryl Zuckerman from Biocom, and it's great to be here. We are actually now Biocom California. The reason for that is we've actually been around for about 25 plus years, and we started in San Diego, where we're a household name, and we've actually grown now to LA, San Francisco, and continue to grow and follow our customers. Many people say, well, what does Biocom do? The question really should be, what do we not do? Our goal is really to bring the health and life sciences together. In layman's term, we're kind of the Costco of the world. So any kind of need that you have, we fill it. We bring you policy, we bring you events, we bring you savings, capital development. Pretty much, if you have a need, we can fill that. The other things we do is it's based on your California headcount to join our group. And we also RFP with some of the very best out there, centrexIT being one of them. And so we put a lot of that worry away, so you don't have to worry about it. You know that you are going to get the best in class and also the best pricing with these programs. These consist of Thermo Fisher, FedEx, centrexIT, UniFirst, even health benefits. Our benefits are so competitive that oftentimes, unless you're a large corporation like a Genentech or an Eli Lilly, you will not be able to get these by yourself. So I urge you, if you're not part of Biocom, please feel free to reach out to one of your business development folks, and we're happy to tell you a little bit more. And thank you for being here today. So I will pass it over to Dylan. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, my name is Dylan Quiros. I'm from centrexIT. We manage IT Deal Desk, which is part of the Biocom portfolio. IT Deal Desk is the RFP for anything IT related. So if you have any IT contracts or current contracts or things that you're thinking about, bring it to us and we will help you go out and get the best pricing for that. That can be anything from security needs to IT service provider needs, software as a service as well, mobility, and even hardware. So anything that you need IT related, bring it to IT Deal Desk and we will be more than happy to help you out. Back to you, Grant.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Appreciate both of you, Cheryl and Dylan, for those great overviews. And Jennifer, before we start with the cyber panel discussion, do we want to give anything away or shall we go right into it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's start it off with giving out a $50 gift card. 1 second, please. All right, so if you registered, I went ahead and added your name to this list. It's a lot of names there. So let's see. Rich, are you here today? All right, I do not see a response from Rich. Oh, you are here. Excellent.
Oh, no, sorry. That was me, Jennifer Grant. It does not look like Rich is with us today.
Okay, we will do one more spin then. And we have Paul Oh, no, Lorena. Lorena, are you here today?
Lorena's with Ntirety. She's one of, she's, I think, our marketing person.
Oh, she does not qualify. Okay, we'll do one more.
Sorry. I'll tell her that we threw her out of the list. So
Yes. Oh, Linda.
It looks like we have Linda.
All right, Linda,
we have a winner.
you're our first winner today. Thank you, everyone. And now I'll pass it back over to you, Grant.
Awesome. All right. Always fun to get started with some giveaways, right? So with that, let's get to business here. We got some great topics to cover today with some solid panelists. So first and foremost, given the audience that we have here today, we thought it would be very appropriate to talk about vulnerabilities in the biotech space. So it's no secret that biotech companies are large targets for cybercrime these days, and it's only increasing. What are the biggest risks bio companies face today? Satish, let's start with you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So I would consider, the external threats. We can classify that as two aspects. One would be an internal threat. The other one would be an external threat. So from a risk perspective, I would say that, ransomware attacks could be, I would say, topmost threat. And after that, since IPs, basically, cyber espionage as well. So these are the two areas, primary areas, I would say, and recent research also says that in today's context, the dark web is almost having a 15 to 20% of the data from the healthcare industry primarily. So this is basically because of the fact that, the healthcare data is almost 10 times the cost of the financial services. Say, for example, if the credit card information is about $100, it's being sold at $100. So an average cost of a PHI data is almost about $1,000. So that's the kind of, they say that the running rate is almost that much. So because of the fact that Biocom companies also are involved in the supply chain management, which is very complex, and there's a lot of third parties involved into it. And therefore, the ransomware attacks, I would say, would be the primary area, and obviously the cyber espionage would be the area where companies will have to be extremely careful about.
Good point, Satish. Let's go around the horn. James, how about you, sir? What biggest risks are out there for biotech companies today?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with Satish, on the top side, cyber criminals, 90, I think Verizon said 92% of cyber criminal activity is, monetarily based. In the world we live in this COVID environment, any sort of research you're doing around that is a prime target. Whether it's on the dark web, whether it's, we have, of course, my time in the FBI, we saw a number of corporate espionage type attacks. We've also seen industries around the world trying to use cyber as a way to enhance their portfolio. So intellectual property, right? Intellectual property is a very common target, and the criminals are now starting to get into that same idea. Ransomware is that first stage. Then they get into the data breach, right? So they're going to ask for more money, to prevent your data from being made public. Well, the third level, we've started to see this triple extortion is they're actually looking at the data that they're capturing and seeing if there's anything within that data that might have value. So if they find intellectual property inside of their data breach, they now are going to turn around and say, hey, we've got this, this cool project, this cool, new drug that you're working on. If you don't pay us an additional amount of money, we're going to expose that. And that's why, so when we get into data protection and it's not just bulk encryption anymore, it's much more about targeting, knowing what data you have in your environment, and then targeting security around those. And also, and to Robert's point earlier, Robert made a good point, also policy and people, right? So the triple thing of security is technology, people, and policy. So you've got to make sure that, those things are orbiting around what you want to protect. Has to be, so if it's like intellectual property, that's going to be higher than maybe some data that I have sitting out on my, my intranet. So we're going to continue to see that. And then totally thing we didn't even talk much about, and Robert may hit on it, is the insider threat. Unfortunately, we do still see the insiders popping up in Biocom companies, and the same thing, intellectual property, stealing that property and then trying to give it to competitors. So anything that has value probably is something you should be thinking about how you're going to protect it and make sure that it's not usable outside of your environment.
Thank you, James. Great points. And let's round it out with Robert. What do you think the biggest risks are to biotech companies today, sir?
Well, Satish and James did a great job of covering it. I mean, and the internal threats is another thing, we could touch on. My single word, I like to narrow these things down to one word. You guys are all going to laugh about it. I know we've already laughed about this among us, but it's really ignorance. It's the typical problem with almost any problem we have in the world as humans, right? I mean, we don't know what we don't know. So therefore we're off. And I'll pick on centrexIT for a minute on this. And by the way, everybody on the phone call should understand, we work with centrexIT because they do a great job of this. But most people believe that an MSP is taking care of their cybersecurity. And that's not what you originally hired them for 10 years ago. There was no cybersecurity in MSPs. Now you've got people like centrexIT that have started dragging cybersecurity in because they were like, we need to take care of our customers' cybersecurity. But that's an ignorance communications point with a lot of clients and a lot of MSPs. They don't understand that, that disconnect, right? So we still hear a lot of this. We go in and talk to the CIO of a pretty good size, the CEO of a pretty good sized company that's got an MSP, doing the work. And he'll say, oh, IT's got that. And you're like, no, IT's not doing anything for you in the cybersecurity arena because they're trying to keep the lights on. So that's why I come back to the one word of ignorance, So and James, you touched on it. We use the people, processes, technology, and vendors. So there are 4 quadrants, and you better get them all taken care of. And by the way, people will go, what difference do vendors matter? Well, go ask Target, go ask Home Depot, go ask Morgan Stanley. All of those people were breached through their vendor network. They didn't lose control of their cybersecurity. Their vendors lost control, and then the people came in the back door and took over, or got what they wanted. So, well,
we've seen, and to build on that, we've seen that huge over the last couple of years with SolarWinds and Kaseya, right? Large vendors that we all trusted. I mean, it wasn't, it was companies like Mandiant, which found themselves caught in this there. So vendor network is important. So it's not just about going and finding any common company. You got to make sure that the companies that you're using have really tested their chops, made sure that they're secure. You don't want to add additional risk into your environment. So that's why it's important to make sure you're partnering with the right companies.
Well, that gets, not to stay on this too long, Grant, but that gets important that you have to go ask your vendors, provide proof that you're doing this. Yep. And you can start out with a 20-question survey or whatever, 25 questions. But at some point, in fact, right up front, you need to get them to sign a document. And again, a lot of them will go sign a document that they don't realize you just signed up for a $3 million liability issue here, right? That you said you're going to protect my data. And when you don't, right, this is going to get expensive in a hurry. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know that we've dealt with vendor questionnaires when it comes to cybersecurity, and sometimes the responses or lack thereof are eye-opening, right?
Well, and insurance companies are pushing on this now, right? So because of the craziness of ransomware, insurance companies are now saying, you know what, I'm not just going to insure you blanket. I want to know who you have in your environment. I want to know who your firewall vendor is. I want to know when's the last time you actually had a penetration test or a vulnerability assessment. So it's nobody, we're not being just accepted by, raising our hand and saying, I'm doing a great job. That's just not going to work in today's environment.
Yeah, in fact, they incentivize on the, premiums as well. Like, in case if companies are, better matured on the security scale, they incentivize on the premium.
Yeah, he came down. Yeah. The meeting with us or anything? I had a discussion with him. We were talking a little about the finance team. I didn't talk to him very long. He's on a call right now, so we're gonna jump in there again. So should I hang around?
Sounds like Jeff's having a good side conversation.
Yes, I'm actually, there we go. All right. All right. Well, that's a perfect segue into our next topic. So great conversation. So one other topic that comes up pretty often in conversations is how do I ensure my company is compliant? So regulation is big, as we know, in the life science biotech community. So regulation compliance can be a bit overwhelming, especially for startup companies that are diving into it for the first time. The question there would be, what is the best way to make sure a company is compliant? What suggestions would you give to a company who may not have the internal know-how to approach this subject to even get started? Robert, let's start off with you.
Well, in biotech, you're probably going to get hit with the HIPAA regulations if you got any kind of patient data at all. And you may think, well, we don't really serve patients directly. It doesn't matter. If you're working with a company that serves patients and you've got their information, any part of their 18 identifiers, that patient's identifiers, you're now under that regulation and you can get held accountable for it. So, I think, to know what you have to do is back to, you got to go find somebody that, you got to go get help a lot of times, right? Or you got to go read 900 pages of HIPAA law. It's up to you. If you got plenty of time and you just want to go, I see James likes that. Apparently he's read it 2 or 3 times, right?
I did 30 years with the federal government. I know how to read regulations.
Yeah. But in all honesty, HIPAA is just one. There's other ones. I think Satish mentioned ISO 27001, SOC 2. There's there's CIS 20. We use that for a lot of industries that come in. And an example is the technology industries and some of the other industries come in and say, we want a CIS 20 done on our vendors, right? Or we have a vendor come to us and say, we're being required by Fortune 500. But it's sort of back to ignorance. So what do you do when you don't know the answer? And obviously, now we tell all our kids and our wives and our spouses, hey, go Google it and you'll get an answer. And the problem with that is that you get an answer that's another 900 pages and you're so confused that you're like, I still need help. So, I think it's back to you need to go find a company and all 3 of us, right? All 3 of us on here are all in this game. We all have been here long enough. And I think all of us too, it's one of the things, like we have people come to us sometimes and we're like, we're not the right company for what you want to do, right? We don't play well in that space. We have our strengths. We know these things really well. So an example for us, I think Satish, you guys do it. We don't do PCI DSS, right? So if we have a client that needs it, we're going to go to a partner and say, you need to go over here, and talk with and work with these guys. And that's just a choice we made not to get into the credit card world, right?
Right. Well, and speaking of Satish.
Yeah, and building on that with Robert's thing, I just wanted to build on. So the first thing we always say is compliance and security are separate, right? So compliance does not equal security and security does not equal compliance. However, a well-secured environment typically is compliant. And I think, and like what Robert said, if you don't know the answer, there are a lot of companies like us that are out here, like all 3 of us, that are out here trying to help you find a better compliance model. And if I went to a company like, CyberCompass or Ntirety or SecqureOne, and they said, I don't do that. That's respect, right? Because, you want to make sure the companies you're working with know their limitations, but also have a partner network that says, hey, you know what? We don't do PCI DSS, but I know this company does. Because at the end of the day, what we all want is we really do want the companies to be more secure. I say this all the time. I hate the bad guys winning. I hate when I wake up in the morning and see a bad event. I have to pace, because one of the reasons we're in security is we do care. And I think that it's important to find companies to work with that, at the end of that day, they want to make sure that your compliance is there, not just because it's not just checking the box. It's meant to protect your patient data. It's meant to protect your internal privacy data, and just make sure that if something does happen, you don't suffer a major breach that has a lot of people losing their personal privacy data.
Very true, James. Thank you for that. And Satish, let's round it out with you, sir. What recommendations or advice would you give to a company who may not have the internal know-how?
Absolutely. No, I think we'll have to take it in 2 parts, just to add to what James and Robert was saying. I would consider compliance into 2 aspects. One, in most cases, it's driven by self-assessment. Like, for example, HIPAA is more of a self-assessment. There are instances where there's a third-party audit which goes, like ISO 27001 or a SOC 2 audit, or it's a CMMC audit, or any of those areas where there is a third party involved in the audit process. So typically, I would say there are several components to it. So companies will have to evaluate where they stand at this point of time and see how they can progress quickly, because in most cases, all these regulatory and compliance standards are either enforced by the government authorities or by their clients, where they say, hey, is your company SOC type 2 certified or attested, or is your company ISO 27001, especially for the Biocom companies, when they are dealing with the European Union, clients. GDPR could be one of the aspects. ISO 27001 could be one of the aspects. If they are on the cloud, SOC 2, type 2 audit would be one of the requirements they may have. And very recently, if you take a look at the trend, it's moving towards high trust certification. Most of the companies are moving towards high trust. And again, high trust has different classifications. For example, high trust basic is there. You don't have to really get certified, but you can kind of get yourself, validated in terms of whether you're meeting those requirements or not. So you have a basic version, you have a 1-year version, you have a 2-year version. So depending on the risks which are involved in the organization, so companies can evaluate where they are. So as Robert and James pointed out, you need to go to the experts and kind of find out from which would be the starting point for you to, kind of move forward.
I would add one thing. Satish mentioned the self-assessment, and that was true. What we see now and we work with different size clients, but to give you an idea, let's say we work with clients that are in the 50 employees up to 1,000 employee range, and we have some larger than that, and we have single doctors' offices in this. But in our mid-range of clients, their clients are telling them the self-assessment is trash. Stop doing that. It's not acceptable, and the reason is, to give you an idea, we're pretty big in the DoD space for CMMC, the new cybersecurity maturity model certification that's coming out. And that's based on NIST 171, which is a standard coming off of NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm trying to spell out my acronyms so my marketing manager does not beat me with wet noodles after this call. So who's on the call? So what we're seeing around that, though, is that what was going on in the DoD NIST 171 space is everybody was checking the box and doing a self-assessment. We've now got quite a few aerospace and other industries in the DoD. And to give you an example, you're talking, I think when you started out, we were talking about, dumpster fire situations, right? And we have a client that, when they brought us in and we said, do you have your SPUR score off of the assessment? And they're like, oh yeah, we scored like a 90, which is like a 95%. We went and did a full third-party risk assessment on them, and they scored 25%. Okay, to give you an idea, humans are terrible at self-assessment. It's like going to the doctor for an internal medicine case, right? And then or assessing it yourself, and you're like, well, I think I probably have something wrong with my kidney, and you go in and find out, yeah, you had a heart attack. So we're seeing a big change in that in the last probably 18 months. That the bigger clients are just saying, nope, we're done. No third-party assessments. No self-assessments anymore. They have to be third-party.
Right. So it's that outside awareness, right? And I think to that point, let's shift to the next topic of managed security services. So we know that they're critical for at-risk clients. They don't have the qualified, and I think qualified is the key word, internal staff dedicated to cybersecurity. You may have somebody that says, yeah, I handle cyber, but really what are their credentials and how qualified are they? So James, this question is you through Ntirety as a managed security operations center. How does a company know when they should be seeking out a managed security provider? Is it usually a combination of size of a company, industry, what type of information they house, what type of qualifiers can a company identify with?
Yeah, the first thing I always say is that when you start really realizing you need to have security separate from your IT, that's the first conversation, right? I run into a lot of companies, and I think Robert and Satish would say the same thing, where they have IT trying to do security on the side, and it just doesn't work. And the problem is today's security world is way more complex than it was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? We have so many more things like patching. We have, firewall management. We have, MDR management, all of those kind of things. So I would say that as soon as you start having that conversation about, I really need to think about security as a separate business function, I think you need to start looking at a management service right away. Just because you're not going to be able to internally grow your own security practice. Cybersecurity is such a rapidly, we have a huge negative unemployment in cybersecurity. And most companies, when they try to go out and hire their own security people, unless they're in the security realm already, they're just not successful. So I would definitely start saying, when you start taking security seriously, when you realize this is something that you need, that's probably the time to start looking at a managed service, because it's going to be impossible, or I'll say very, very tough in today's environment. Last year, we saw over a 1,000% increase in ransomware attacks against companies in the medical and the biocom fields. Just ransomware, and that's just one aspect. Satish talked about business email compromise, which is a much larger monster than we even addressed. So I would say it should definitely be a consideration when you decide it's time to do security right, and to do it, you need to definitely look at the cost effectiveness of hiring someone to manage your security for you. It's just the right way, I think, to go in today's environment. So.
Okay, that's very good. And just for more information, would you work with an organization that already has a dedicated cybersecurity officer or team, or is it no team in place whatsoever?
So a lot of times we'll even talk about virtual CISO services. So the first step I would say for most companies is you want to appoint somebody to be in charge of your security practice, or you want to hire a virtual security officer, because the first place you're going to start is going to be policy and procedure. You've got to make sure you have a disaster recovery plan in place. You've got to have an incident response plan in place, and you have to test those things. Then you're going to have to do a vulnerability assessment. You're going to have one, and this I would say not internal. This should be something you have somebody professionally come in, because we sometimes get blinders because we're looking at our own forest, right? And if you bring somebody in and look at that vulnerability assessment, then you sit down with a company like centrexIT or us or CyberCompass or whoever, and then say, these are what's identified as current vulnerabilities in your environment. So these are what you must cover. We talk about horror stories. I had a meeting last year with a company, very large company, media company, and the CISO was talking about ransomware and how worried he was around it. And we talked for an hour, and we agreed to meet again in a few weeks. Well, what happened? He got hit with ransomware in the 2 weeks or 3 weeks after we met, and to me it was a tragedy, because I felt bad for the guy, because we had really connected and we were having that conversation. But in the decision making, it's paralysis analysis, or analysis paralysis, right? He didn't make a decision to get to a better resiliency security model. And so I wouldn't wait in today's environment. In any given year, the odds of you being hit are 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, depending upon most Biocom, it's about 1 in 3 in a given year. So if you're not secure, let's figure out where you need to be and move towards a better security model.
All right, that sounds great. Yeah, good advice, James. And I know we've got a lot of great topics. We'll cover one of the tools that we can put in place, endpoint detection and response, because I do want to get Satish's input on this, along with maybe Robert and James as well, to round it out before we go to Q&A. But I think we've heard about it, and we want to explain a little bit more about endpoint detection and response, or EDR. It's an essential tool to have in the defense kit against cyber incidents like ransomware, cyber espionage. Satish, do you mind to help explain a little bit more about EDR, how it impacts the company?
Yeah, just to give a perspective, like, earlier days, it was more of the antivirus, the endpoints were kind of managed by the antivirus, anti-malware and all those kind of stuff. But these days, you have the advanced EDR systems where you have the cyber threat intelligence, which is integrated into it. You also have, in some cases, the SOAR, which is more like a security orchestration and automated response, which means that the EDR per se would take care of all the responses There's a bunch of playbooks which is integrated into the whole system, EDR system. So depending on the needs of the customer, those playbooks are put into play. And, you could have responses where you have one last stage of, check before it's actually implemented. Or you could move these kind of malwares, which are very advanced malwares, which are there, into a sandbox and do a sort of a forensic analysis based on that. So the EDR system in today's context has also gone into, XDRs as well, which is called as a, more of the extended, detection and response. And you could also, club the MDRs into it, like the managed detection and response, which is not a technology per se, but it's more of the services which is being offered, like what, James was pointing out, like, the managed services or SOC as a service. So it's an integration of all these things. So EDR per se is a huge need in today's context because of the supply chain management, which is prevalent in the Biocom industry. At various stages, the vendors needs to be secured. The CROs, the CMOs who are there as part of the ecosystem of the Biocom industry. I think all those people will have to be completely secured with the help of a EDR system.
Awesome. Thank you, Satish. I think it's a solid overview of EDR. Let's transition over to the questions that we've received so far in our discussion. So this question is from Reggie, and this is for all the panelists. Are there templates to guide us on the right questions to ask concerning cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to go with that, James?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you where to start first. CISA came out with guidelines on how to choose an MSP. The Homeland Security, CISA has been under a really big mandate to actually help people more. They have, I think it's 20 questions of what to ask your MSP, but I would ask questions like, what kind of certifications do you have? If you're running a SOC, what certifications do you have? SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO 27001. These are things that we've done in order to show that we've done that internal security to make sure that we're building there. You want to have, what kind of assurances do we have in place? Somebody's at my front door. What kind of assurances do we have? That you have API security and data security in place, because you don't want to lose your data through an MSP. I mean, one of the things we've seen across COVID is the number of attacks through RDP has increased. And most of those are because of somebody else is managing your security. So, you want to make sure that you're asking those kind of questions. What technologies are in place? What certifications do you have in place? Right. So these are, I think, the first questions I would start with for anybody that wants to manage your data.
Yeah, I would like to add, the support is a very important component, especially, if you're talking about SOC as a service or managed security. So the kind of people who are involved, just as the company needs to be certified, the people who are going to manage that whole thing, if it's an outsourced model, obviously, the people who are going to be involved, how qualified they are, do they have the right kind of experience in that handling, any incident response kind of a scenario. So those are additional aspects, I think, which companies will have to be mindful of as well.
Excellent. Great feedback. This next question, Robert, I think it's best for you, sir. I am reading about new state privacy laws and more biometric information identifier usage, especially in healthcare, and how they could be costly if we are not in compliance. What are you all anticipating with the privacy laws and how it will impact us?
Well, there's actually, we track this through several law firms. It's sort of interesting, right? So we want to see what the lawyers are saying and thinking and doing. And I don't know if James or Satish knows off the top of the head. I know last year was about 14 states had put privacy laws in place. Now, the question is, they hadn't kicked in because of COVID. And I should say last year, there were up to 14 last year. That's been done 2 or 3 years in the previous, like by 2019, I think 14 states had privacy laws, but they weren't enforcing them. So to give you a good example, New York DFS was there for the financial industry. So Reg 500 got put in place, I believe, in 2019. And when when COVID kicked in, they suspended it because they realized, okay, we're all over the floor to start with. We just don't have time to enforce this. And I think one of the problems was they didn't have the staff, right? We're seeing those all come back into play this year. So, I think to a certain extent, this is sort of back to, I don't know, I could be off track on the answer to this, but it's back to finding somebody that's familiar with all of this. It's like Satish mentioned, we do most of the standards and regulations you mentioned, Satish, right? And Ntirety, James, you guys do this. And it's like, you got to talk to somebody that's like, okay, wait, you're in biotech, but you're in California. So you're going to have to do HIPAA and you're going to have to do CCPA, most likely. I mean, you may not, and we can look at that. And then we find out, well, we actually are doing work in the European Union. You're like, okay, well, now you got to go do GDPR, And so it's part of this is a learning process when we're doing the sales. So, a lot of people are like, they think, well, I just want you to give me a quote. And we're like, well, yeah, okay, if you'll answer these 25 questions and tell us where your locations are. And, it goes on and on, right? Because we have to get a lot of information to then go, well, okay, they're not doing it yet, but South Carolina has a law. Michigan has a law. So you start figuring all these things out. And an example was we did a insurance firm that was breached 2 years ago. We got brought in after the forensics were done, and it was just this disaster zone. And when we start looking into it, we're like, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess you on CIS 20 and New York DFS Reg 500 because you're a financial-based organization. And they were sort of like, well, wait a minute, what about, and they're asking us about NIST, CSF. And we're like, well, they're all based on that. We need one that's focused on where you are and what you're doing. And they weren't in New York. They didn't have any business in New York, but they were, once we talked to them about it, it's like, this is the one to go with. This is how we're going to address this and identify everything and build, do a full assessment on you. So I don't know if that answered your questions, but maybe James and Satish have a little bit different take on that. But I think you're back to consulting. You got to go ask somebody that knows, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, the other thing is this brings into the thing of, where your data resides, right? So when we started getting into cloud conversations, where does that data reside? What is the law governing that? And this is something that's huge with GDPR. So if it's housed in a country that they don't, that doesn't have the rules in place, it can change what your requirements are. So it has to be a holistic approach. It has to be all of what we do. How is our data managed? Where's that data reside? What controls do we have on that data? So it's not as simple as just saying, here, write me a check for $1,000 and you'll be good. It just doesn't work that way.
I think that's a very good point to understand too, is we often will go in, we ask these questions, we talk to them, we do presentations, for the sales, we sign a quote, we get into doing the first assessment and we're like, okay, wait, we need to talk to this person and this person, and it's about a totally different regulation. And they're going, wait, why? And we're like, because that's really one of the ones we got to go find out about. So that just happens. That's just a normal process because, again, unfortunately, it's back to my ignorance statement. It sounds mean, and ignorance is just that we don't know yet, right? It's not we're being stupid. It's that we don't know yet, and we've got to be educated. And once we're educated, same with us. We come in and we're ignorant of your company, right? We've got to be educated to a certain extent. And then we realize we need to interview different people. We need to interview about different regulations. Things of that nature start happening. And of course, the larger the company, the broader their clientele, the broader it all gets, right? So
right, absolutely. Okay, well, I want to ask the next to last question here from one of our other attendees. Short of a cyber crisis that impacts business operations, how can life science CEOs be swayed to apply sufficient resources for cybersecurity as a means to protect revenue and intellectual property rather than just for the sake of compliance?
Bring them in. Seriously, when you're doing your exercises, they need to be there. I'll tell you, that's one of the biggest things I've run into over time is that CEOs aren't there when you show your disaster recovery. And when you're establishing your RTO, or your RPO for a critical event, you may be under the belief that you can be down for an hour, but the CEO is expecting 15 minutes or something like that. And so when you start doing these exercises, they need to you have to make sure that they are there, they have buy-in, and that they're not just sort of pencil whipping it. The second thing on top of that is there's some tools out there to show what would happen if a breach occurred. And sometimes those aren't a bad thing to bring in to say, if we didn't have good results, here's what would happen. That's an eye opener. But I think most executives are buying in more now than they were probably 5-6 years ago. I think unfortunately COVID has really driven the security conversations into a lot of people's heads, and there's a lot more fear around ransomware. But now we got to take that fear and make sure that we're putting it into progressive action.
Yeah, I ran a tier 3+ data center about 10 years ago, and I made the CEO come out and turn off main power to the building. And he stood there for a while, and I said, "You need to turn the power off." And he's like, "You're sure the UPS will hold for 30 seconds?" And we had diesel engines that were 25, 30 feet long. I mean, they were 16-cylinder, bigger than a train engine diesel engines, right, to power this thing up, right? And I said, "Yeah, it all works." And he's literally holding the bar, right? I mean, we're out in the yard, and he's like, he just looks at me, he goes, "You know what happens if this fails?" And I said, "We're both fired." And he goes, "That is not what I was going to say." I said, "I know you were going to say I was fired, but just so you know, you're going to get fired too because this failed." And he was, I mean, but that's what that's where it gets down to with these CEOs, right? It's like, are you convinced that you're covered in a major disaster? And here's what's really funny. They'll all go, "Well, yeah, I mean, if the server goes down, my IT guys are really good." I said, "Let's forget about that for a minute. Let's just assume that the building burns to the ground and there's not a single server's left. How are you getting it back up? And how soon do you need it back up?" And then they go, "What do you mean it's all gone?" I was like, "That's disaster recovery. Are you ready?" And he's like, "Okay." And I said, "Okay, let me walk into your computer room and just unplug the plugs, because that'll fail. You're probably going to have hard drives fail and all kinds of stuff. You're not going to recover unless you've got everything sitting there ready to go. You're not going to recover for like 72 hours. Can you be down 72 hours? This isn't a funny conversation anymore, man." I said, "That's the point." It's not a funny conversation when it happens.
Right. Well, and on that note, I want to round out the discussion with one last question, because it's a very important one. What steps should a company take if they are a victim of an attack and they hope that they have a disaster recovery plan in place, right? So, let's go. Go ahead, James.
Insurance. I mean, your insurance company is going to be the first place you contact. You got it, and that has to be in place before, right? They're going to probably have a relationship with some sort of incident response company. If you've got SOC services, your SOC is going to be probably phone call number. They're going to probably call you, honestly. Your SOC should be calling you. If they're not, that's a different conversation, right? And then you're going to want to follow your incident response plan to the letter. It's really important to make sure, but the problem is this has to be in place before. So much of this is preparation. And if you haven't done the preparation and you don't have anything in place, it's a train wreck. You might as well just go to a computer and start writing your resume, because it's going to be a really bad sequence of probably 24 days is the average downtime from a ransomware attack right now. So it's going to be 24 days of a whole lot of heartache. So.
Yeah, I would like to add, we definitely would recommend companies to also reach out to their law firm or whoever is there, a person who's going to consult them, and then, necessary breach notifications needs to be kind of, led to the agencies and to the customers as well. So that's a very important component in today's context, because, there are instances where companies have been penalized because of information being passed over to the law, the authorities basically. So I would say that that's also a very important component.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. This has been a great panel discussion. Want to be mindful of everyone's time today. I see that we're at the top of the hour. So with that, Jennifer, I'll kick it back to you to wrap things up.
Thank you very much, Grant. I went ahead and I pulled a couple of names while they're wrapping up, since the discussion got really, really good. So I have Jennifer Jensen. Are you on? I see a Jennifer, but I didn't know if that was Jennifer Jensen. Okay, must be a different Jennifer. Scott Donato?
I think Scott may have already left.
Oh, he was on though, wasn't he?
He was on, yeah.
All right, excellent. And then for our $100 gift certificate that we're giving out for people who filled out the pre-event poll, that goes to Alan Seligson. So Alan, I'll be contacting you about that. And with that, thank you everyone so much for attending. Really appreciate it. If you do want the $25 Thorn gift card, I'm going to post the link one more time in the chat. Go ahead and fill that out after this meeting, and I'll email it over to you. Anything else to wrap up today, Grant?
I think that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to join us. We appreciate your time. And as always, feel free to reach out to Biocom or ourselves through IT Deal Desk should you need any help on anything we talked about today. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.